Hello everyone and welcome to another Content UX audit. So I am just going to take a moment here to make sure that the live stream works as usual. I'm hoping that my internet doesn't give out today like it did one or two live streams ago. It looks like it's working so far, so that's great. And before we get into today's Content UX audit, I just wanted to remind you that we have this form on the bottom of the screen that allows you to submit any content that you might like audited. And I'm going to open it up a little bit to allow you to use that form not only to submit your own content, but if there's a brand that you admire, or you just want, another take on, kind of like the Maddie Osmond brand of how their content UX is working, then you can also use this form to submit brands that you would like me to do these audits for, even if it's not necessarily you. And if you submit one, I will make sure to give you a shout out on the next Content UX audit if I, in fact, use your submission. So, today we are going to do a Content UX audit for ActiveCampaign. I decided to pick them because I really like their content, and pretty much anybody that I audit, unless I guess I say otherwise, is a brand that I respect and admire. And so I'm doing it because I think they have a really great foundation and great practices and things like that. But there's always another take on how people are doing things. Just to kind of throw out another opinion there. So ActiveCampaign will be who we're auditing today. And not only do I like their content, we are also a customer of theirs. Amanda from our team attended one of their study halls earlier this year to just get some more best practices on how to use their software. And I'm going to show you really quick. We have the way that we use ActiveCampaign. Quite transparently, we haven't sent a newsletter in quite a long time, so we're just kind of collecting subscribers right now for when we're ready to relaunch. That is something that's in the works. I can't say exactly when it's going to happen, but we also use it as part of our opt-in campaign. So we really like ActiveCampaign's automation. So for something like this is a blog post on the Blogsmith website about SaaS SEO strategies. And so we created a stylized ebook version of this blog post. And this is technically the front end is opt-in monster to get the email, but then it's ActiveCampaign to enact the automation that delivers it. So we're using ActiveCampaign right now, really mostly for those automations. And then once we get our stuff together for our newsletter as well. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get into today's UX audit. I kind of picked a random blog post on their website. I mean, it was one that was published fairly recently. I did pick something that was WordPress related because that's just kind of my area of my sphere of knowledge or whatever. I always like WordPress stuff, and even though it's not really necessarily what ActiveCampaign focuses on, it was just a familiarity thing that spoke to me. So starting at the very top of the page, some of the things we're seeing here, the first thing that comes to mind, and it also becomes maybe more obvious as you scroll as well and you kind of look at the page as a whole. I just want to get to the bottom really quick to see what that looks like. What I wanted to say, and I'll go back up, so sorry for the Blair Witch Project scrolling here. What I wanted to say is there are a lot of things that draw the eye on this, single blog post page template. Not this topic specifically, but just kind of the way that it's set up. So we have kind of a welcome bar at the top. We have these sort of two columns. One of them has the title, one of them has the hero image, and then, the content itself, a sidebar, and then we also have this cookie opt-in GDPR thing, which, it definitely makes sense that ActiveCampaign has the cookie opt-in on their site, especially because email marketing is so close to the rules of GDPR and opt-ins and getting consent. One thing that I was thinking about when I selected this blog post, and also just this content experience in general, is what GDPR what's the word I'm looking for? Cohesion, adherence, like follow compliance, I guess. GDPR compliance, what I'm not well versed in is like, what does your cookie consent notice have to have? What does it have to look like? Are there any guidelines in terms of like how many pixels it needs to take up, or like, do you have to hit it before you can access, do you have to hit accept, for example, before you can access the content? That would be, a really excellent blog post, I think, for somebody to say, here's kind of like the legal rules and guidelines, and then here's the resulting design standards that you could or should follow. Because that's just something I don't know. As far as cookie consent notices or opt-ins go, this one is pretty benign. It doesn't really like get in the way of the content experience. It's easy enough to hit accept or X to get out of it. But yeah, that's just something from kind of a personal note. I would be curious to hear like what the rules are, to see how unobtrusive, I guess, that we could make it. I don't know if it could be much more unobtrusive than this, unless it was just reducing the visual space it takes up. But also it's like, is the goal to get that, cookie opt-in, so that you can then track the cookies, especially now that Google says that they're not going to take away cookies, after being pretty adamant that they were. So, prior to Google making that decision, people might have thought like, yeah, we want to make sure that we're doing whatever we can to track whatever we can. I'm kind of losing the line that I was getting at. Anyway, now that Google has made it clear that cookies are here to stay, then you probably want to, make sure that you are legally in the right in the way that you are gathering them, if that is important to your reporting, which it probably is. So I spent a lot of time on that. I kind of want to move on. My first point was, again, that there are a lot of things that draws the eye here. So just some thoughts. I think that ActiveCampaign probably regularly uses this welcome bar up here to promote any sort of like, in this case, it's the latest webinar. Maybe it's like a new feature. We do it on the Blogsmith website as well. So let me just show you that really quick, just a different take on that. And I know I brought it up on one of these live streams before, but basically once it loads, and again, this is also an opt-in monster feature that we use. We have one of these specifically about my book, and it's been there for a while, so it probably needs to change. But just to say that welcome bars are definitely a great way to draw attention to something, especially something very timely. I wonder if it's adding to like visual clutter for it to be this like large height-wise. And also adding like the images, so that I think, I'm sure ActiveCampaign has done, their testing and stuff like that in terms of like, is this taking away, or is this really like the greater goal than the page that it sits on? So some of it is just like understanding, I guess, what your priorities are, right? Because we could make it smaller, right? And then maybe there will be less signups, but also maybe then that brings forth, the true goal or like call to action of the page itself. So anyway, I guess what I'm trying to say is like, it's a balancing game. And it's just something to maybe question if it's ultimately getting in the way of other goals is what I would want to test there. So besides that, so we have, the cookie thing, which we can't get rid of, but maybe it could be optimized more. We have the welcome bar thing, which we could get rid of, but it's something that like I also agree is useful for drawing attention to specific initiatives or a timely webinar. And then there's also just like the way that the page is structured in general. It kind of throws me off a little bit that we have like these two columns in terms of the title and the image. I'm kind of more used to, and this is very personal preference, but I think even in like a lot of the content that I tend to consume these days, it's usually like title and then image below it, and then you get to the content. I'm not saying this is the best way to do it. I'm just saying that this is something that I've kind of grown used to as a reader, and I like it because it's just like very focused, right? It's very focused on the content. I've always been kind of half and half about like, do you want to have a sidebar? And if you have a sidebar, how can you optimize it to be like really useful and not add to visual clutter? I think it was Kinsta who kind of like first made me think of the sidebar as something that really gets in the way of the reading experience. And so we haven't used one at the Blogsmith since. But I do like having the lightweight table of contents sidebar in general, so I do think that that's something to keep. I do love too that they have this like just, very like straight to the point call to action, try it now for free, no credit card required, instant setup. I mean, beautiful copy, wouldn't change a thing. So maybe it does make sense to have this lightweight sidebar, but I wonder if it would be a better reader experience to maybe not treat the hero image area as kind of like these two separate things. And again, I'm sure ActiveCampaign has tested this. This is just my uninformed opinion. Well, I guess informed by, the other content stuff that I see and do, but not knowing exactly like the information that ActiveCampaign has. Other than that, I do really like how like simple and like clean this hero image area is set up. They give us a category. We can click into it and see more content. They give us the publishing date, so we know, like the last time it was updated. We have an author, and then we also have ways to share. It probably goes without saying, but maybe it would be useful to add a call to action that says share on here. I think it's more or less understood that like that's what that is for, but just saying for the record since we're auditing this. All right, so let's get into kind of the content itself. This hero image, one thing that I wanted to say is I would love to see the text a little bit larger, even if it meant, maybe like minimizing the visual space that the icon takes up, or maybe making it more of like a background transparent image sort of thing. But this is something that is, fairly hard to read even on my monitor, which I'm trying to remember how big it is. Maybe it's like 26 inches. I have a lot of space and I have multiple like windows open and things like that, but it's still hard to read on like what is the largest, viewing area that I have of all my devices. I would think that on mobile, this would be especially hard to read. So that's just a thought in general. And that's something that we think about at the Blogsmith too. Like whenever we create new featured images, we test them on mobile to make sure that things aren't getting cut off. But you can see that like the words themselves are what's taking up like the most visual space here. So let's go ahead and get through some of the content here. What I'm mostly going to focus on during this audit is formatting, because that is what stood out to me the most of just like things that I was thinking as I went through. And this is probably a good time to mention, I haven't officially announced this yet, but I have recently been accepted to be a LinkedIn Learning instructor. And it's relevant because I was just working on a lesson yesterday that is about formatting content. And so I can't tell you like exactly what the course is going to be about or the title of it, but what I can say is that it relates to creating content for the web. And so this was just like a very timely blog I didn't go into it with the focus of like wanting to find something to talk about formatting, but it's kind of cool because it just happened to be top of mind. Okay, so let's go and get into the content itself. I'm going to go ahead and accept this cookie notice just to get it out of the way. That is, a better reading experience. And again, it's not really something that can be gotten rid of or done without, but, maybe something to optimize. I don't know. When we get into the content itself, the first thing that stands out to me is that the intro is a bit of a wall of text. So at the Blogsmith, our guidelines are to try to aim for paragraphs that are no longer than about 3 lines long, and for sentences to not take up more than 2 lines. And I'm not necessarily focusing on the sentences when I say that. I'm just giving you kind of like the full related guideline. This is something that I learned many years ago. I used to work with Leadfeeder, and that was part of their editorial guidelines. And it's something that has stuck with me since and has kind of stood the test of time with how content has changed, but really like ultimately understanding that people who are reading on the web have short attention spans. They need to be able to quickly find their answer, and they want to be able to skim. And so the more kind of like blank space that you create around the text itself, the easier it is to skim, and ultimately the more engagement you're likely to get. So, I mean, it could be as simple as like splitting this out into a paragraph. I know it's a sentence, but kind of like varying the lengths of your sentences and your paragraphs. I mean, that's something that is is very human, first of all. Generative AI tends to have less variation in those things. But also it like creates a visual interest. So maybe that could be split up, and then maybe, you know, there's some other things too. You know, like maybe this could be another paragraph or something like that. Another thing that might be cool to do too, I really like when brands use call-out boxes, like this blue one here. But again, it is kind of a wall of text. One thing I might suggest is using some text decorations here and there for visual emphasis. So like maybe like payment gateways, we're kind of like defining here, or at least like discussing the importance of them. So maybe like that could be bolded, or maybe some of the different features, or, you know, maybe there's like a pro tip and you bold, you know, the words pro tip or something like that. Okay, so let's see here. What else stood out to me? Gotta give ActiveCampaign props for spelling WooCommerce correctly with the capital C. So that's another important thing that tends to come up just in edits for B2B tech related content in general, is there are certain brand names that are commonly misspelled. WordPress commonly gets misspelled with a lowercase p. SEMrush, everyone, they have rebranded, and the E and the M are now lowercase, like the RUSH. HubSpot, I always see the S lowercase, so that should be capitalized. And WooCommerce is another one that I commonly see misspelled. So that's great that they got it right, especially because I haven't read through this entire article, but I'm assuming it has to do with, and I'm assuming that they're talking about this topic because it integrates with ActiveCampaign. And so, you know, always good to keep your vendors, keep your partners, keep your clients happy by respecting the way that their name should be spelled. It's, you know, an easy thing to get right if you're paying attention. But let's go back and talk about formatting, because that's what I said was going to be the big focus here. Okay, so I guess one thing I'll say too, before we get more into the formatting, is more of like the product-led content. And we create a lot of content for WordPress, but also about software as a service in general. And, you know, a typical audience for us are like small business owners, or, you know, other users who are configuring products for the brand that they work for. And so in many of the WordPress articles, especially that we write, this section that's like how to set it up, it's always great to show screenshots of every step of the process and to also annotate them. So if you're referring to like a certain UI element, it's like, you know, circling that or pointing an arrow towards it or something like that. In the Blogsmith style guide, which you can find on our website, we also talk about formatting rules for referring to different like user interface elements. So we do have kind of an approach for that if that's something that is relevant to your brand, and you want to create consistency around. So that would be my suggestion for this section, is to just kind of like take people through it a little bit more. You could also achieve this with a video or like GIFs, you know, if there's like a couple steps that you want to show at once. So that's just a thought there. But let's get into more of the formatting stuff that I was actually trying to talk about. So one thing that I probably noticed that maybe a lot of other people don't notice, because because I have this web design background, and so I'm like thinking about the design, I'm thinking about the content, and kind of like in tandem. I think people notice this, but I think it's subconscious. I don't think that they necessarily like think about it in the way that I'm about to say it. But let's look at this section right here. Okay, so there's this visual margin. Before we get to this call out box where it says here's the breakdown, maybe if I kind of like go in a little bit like that, it'll be more obvious. But after this paragraph, you see there's some visual margin here, there's some blank space, but then after the call out box, not blocks, there is no margin. It goes straight into the next section. Something like that, to me, it might be purposeful that after a call out box there is no margin, but before it there is. To me, it looks a little visually imbalanced. And again, it's something that like you might not consciously be aware of, right? But there's something about it that's off. And I feel like it's one of those things that like maybe this is making a bigger deal of it than it actually is, but I do think that that's something that could hurt trust. If you have these like design inconsistencies, or like a perceived inconsistency, if that's the way it is supposed to be, right? There were some other examples here, so let me zoom out and see if I can give you those. I might have to refer to my notes if it's not super obvious here. Oh, the other thing I was going to say was about their bulleted lists. And so this is a big thing for me when it comes to having numbered or unnumbered lists. You want to be really careful with parallelism. So for example, if the first, if you have kind of like a lead-in for each point, then they should all have that lead-in, which they do. If that lead-in is bolded, then they should all be bolded. One thing that's a personal style preference for me is to not extend a text decoration to any forms of punctuation like this colon. But again, as long as it's consistent, which it is, that's totally fine. And it's a matter of personal preference. And other things that you could think about with parallelism when it comes to list items are things like, do they all end with some sort of punctuation? Like you wouldn't want to see one without one. And then another thing that you might consider is like what comes after the lead-in. So most of these are like a verb: compare, ensure, consider. This one actually is not parallel, if that's the parallelism we're going for, because this is not a verb, but everything else is. So those are a couple things that you could do to kind of like self-edit for parallelism specifically. So what I wanted to say was there's that numbered list, and then there's another one. And unless they've changed it since the last time I looked at here, but I think it's up here. Okay, so this was the other numbered list. So another thing that I want to draw your eye to, mostly from a parallelism standpoint, is so not only should list items be parallel to each other, but lists and the formatting and styling that you use should be parallel to other lists within the same piece of content. So check out here, we have kind of like a subtitle. I'd have to inspect the element to make sure that it's actually subtitle formatting, but it's, it's bolded text that kind of stands out from the rest of the body copy. And then you'll notice here that the list items are indented. But when we go down here, I think it changed since yesterday, because when I was looking at this yesterday, these were not indented, and also one of the lists, the numbers, were bolded with a text decoration, and now they aren't. So they probably did some quality control to fix that, I'm assuming. But that, that happened between now and yesterday. I think I mentioned too, it wasn't indented, but it also wasn't under a subheading, so that could have been purposeful. So let me see if there's anything else that comes to mind. I think I've covered a lot of my major points. I do love their different types of call out boxes. I think those are great. I think when I was looking yesterday, they might have also had some of those like visual differences within the call out boxes in terms of like the margin before and after. I'm not necessarily noticing that now. So let's see. Let me kind of finish up on the bottom here, and then I'll see if there are any other notes that I had. We can see like a clear author stated. What I would really love to see is a bio, because when you click this, and I'll just open it in a new tab. When you click this, there is a bio for Jeremy. And as Google, everybody's experimenting with AI, and some AI content ranks, but ultimately Google has kind of doubled down, I would say, on the importance of expertise, authoritativeness, trustworthiness, and the other E that I always forget. But suffice it to say that having an author bio that kind of like ties you back to the topic itself is something that will be increasingly more important with, these like Google helpful content updates, with the proliferation of AI content. Like, this is how you beat them. It's by showing Google that you're creating something unique and you're creating it from an expert point of view. So I would have loved to see this over here. And then we have those share icons again, maybe just having the word share semicolon in front of them. Maybe, that would drive more people to click on them. I don't know. I like that we have the related posts. Something that I'll say that like we have been guilty of, I think we're better about it now. But when you have like a widget like this that previews blog posts, there's usually this excerpt text. And so you really want to try to optimize that excerpt text so that it's not cutting off with this ... And it might be as simple as using like your meta description in that place if you don't want to create, totally different text, but you also have to make sure that your meta description ultimately isn't greater than the character count that like fits here. I mean, there's probably something that could be done within this template to also like expand this space, the available space to write that description. So those are just things to think about in general, like for content as a whole. Not much to say down here. We kind of have that same CTA. I wonder if it would make more sense to vary it. But maybe there's something to just repeating it because that's ultimately the most important thing. And then they do have it on this bottom bar as well. So again, I think this probably didn't pop up until after I had gotten rid of the cookie consent notice, but it does add a little bit more visual, what's the word I'm looking for, like disturbance or whatever as I'm going through this. Okay, so let me see if there was anything else that I wanted to mention. I'm not seeing as many of those like spacing inconsistencies that I saw yesterday, but just like for your own reference, it's just making sure that like, your title, your subheadings, the body copy, your list items, etc. have consistent spacing throughout. So that's kind of how you can measure that or at least eyeball it. One thing I was also going to say with capitalizations is it's important to be consistent with your subheadings. You want to make sure that, if you use title case or sentence case, that you're consistent with that throughout. And that's something that ActiveCampaign did really well. They were consistent throughout. Yeah, this is like the best example of that spacing thing. I swear to you, yesterday there were more examples. But anyway, I think that is good for today. So let me get back to this other camera view here. So once again, if you would like to submit either your content or a brand you admire that you want another opinion on, please use this URL down here. It's Blogsmith, no vowels, .tips/content UX. And I still have to put up the next event, so that's not available to say you're attending yet, but look out for that. I'll have that, probably by the end of the week for 2 weeks from today. And it'll either be another content UX audit or a specific focus topic in the world of content. So thank you so much for joining me today. I hope, this gave you some interesting food for thought. And yeah, like props to ActiveCampaign because it was hard to find things to comment on. But there, I think, are a few points here just for all of us to consider in general.